Brothers and sisters, today let's reflect on the downward descent from the virtue of humility. So we've been saying that the spiritual life is probably best captured by the whole idea of going up to God by going down in terms of the spiritual life. In terms of, by the going down part is really captures the sense that how we might first instincts seek to find happiness and to find God is quite the opposite way. And I gave the example of like virtue. For example, I think it's best seen like if you're preparing in a sport. At first there's so much suffering in the sacrifice and the preparation to excel at the sport. And it involves so much to be given up. While maybe some kind of disordered primal instinct maybe might be to try and succeed at the sport and jump over that stage and just succeed, but in fact we probably just fail. But what we're surprised by is that after all of the sacrifice of virtue and preparing well for this game, I say it's football or hockey or whatever it is, then one learns a mastery over that by all the sacrifice. And so there's the joy that arises over the mastery over the game that one now possesses in them, which is the virtue, with this mastery, this ease at which they can play the game that they wouldn't have if they hadn't practiced and maybe, ate the right things and all that. And then they have the joy now of that. While at first someone might just give into all their temptations, ate whatever they want, slept, overslept, didn't wake up early for their routines, etc. But then when they went to play the game, they ended up in bad shape, they end up discouraged, they end up in a sort of a negative state. And so the spiritual life is a bit like that, and that's what I mean by the downwards descent. That we have to do things in our spiritual life that might be painful, might be hard, but that will lead us ultimately to the joy of being with God, mastering our life, and the joy of virtue, the joy of being like God and being one with God in the way God is. So today we want to look at the virtue of humility. That, humility is a funny virtue that sometimes we can misunderstand. It doesn't mean that we have to be doormats. It doesn't mean that we cannot do great things or have projects. It doesn't mean that we just shut up and be silent and we just stare into space, or that we don't laugh loud, or we don't, have make jokes, or we don't. In other words, that we're not human. No, humility will actually humanize us, make us quite human. But humility, St. Thomas says, is really about recognizing the truth. It's tied to the notion of the truth. A humble person is sober about what is true. And that means sober about their defects as well. Sober even about their strengths, the gifts that they have, but they recognize that the good things that they do not stem only from themselves, but stem ultimately from God. So a humble person is someone who's tremendously grateful. Just grateful to have life, grateful for the gifts that they have. And so a humble person is safeguarded from maybe that temptation for all of us that the grass is green on the other side, which could be a form of pride, that we're saying to God that what we don't have right now is enough for me. And so and therefore all the other sins like greed and envy and all that could trigger on. So a humble person avoids that spiral of sin. But humility is a downward path as well. It's because it's as in the scriptures, it says, don't put yourself up in the high places, but choose the low places, and then God will lift you up. So humility is also bowing down in prayer. It's the opposite to that, that parable with the Pharisee. He goes off. It's like showtime. He's showing off before God. Oh, I did this. I pay tithes. I do this charity. I pray. I fast. And these are all things that in people, us, in our spiritual lives, we do. And we it's almost like trying to attract God by all these things that we do. And saying, look, God, look how attractive I am. Now you'd hear my prayer. And it's a subtle temptation for all of us. While in that same gospel event, we see a man, a sinner, a great sinner, coming in and just not even raising his eyes to heaven, but just bowing down, kind of humbling in his spirit and saying, Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner. Because he's true, he's being truthful, he's realizing that fundamentally that he's a sinner, that he needs God. And what happens? That act attracts the eyes of Jesus Christ to him, and Jesus points him out to the other people. So that humility attracts the eyes of God, basically. And that's a principle, for our spiritual life. The more humble we go and we realize, Lord, I'm nothing. I'm actually nothing. All the good that is in me has come from you. And therefore, if God has given us gifts, a humble person means I have to fulfill those gifts. I have to develop my talents and gifts for God. That's a humble thing to do because it came from God and God didn't give it for no reason. So let us humble ourselves to attract God.